Welcome, everybody. It's probably about a 2-minute later login than usual, and there's a very valid reason for it, and I think I'll share it with you. It'll take less than 2 minutes. It's a unique life experience that hopefully all of you will have at some point in your future lives, if you haven't already. But first, let me just remind you that your papers are due, on Wednesday, 2 days from today. Unless my memory is going on me. Yes, it is. It's the 20th, which is Wednesday, by midnight. And I think I've already done this more than once, but I'll do it again. I'm going to hold up the sample of how to send them. I think everyone must know everyone did this on your first papers. But the second paper is equally important that you do it this way, which would be obviously our 2.1 short paper number 2, underline last name, comma, first name, and then please do send it to me at markw@aol.com. If you want to send it to, again, I've said this many times, the official campus website. Outlook is fine, but just last night I had the same issues that I've had for years with that website in trying to log, in papers and things. I have a student from Africa whose first name is Good Luck. It's a common first name in parts of West Africa and Central Africa. And every time I tried to respond to him when he sends me material that way, it won't let me on Outlook, but it will. I mean, maybe because it doesn't recognize his name. That doesn't happen with AOL, Gmail, Yahoo. So it's just safer for you to send your papers to me, and you'll get a quicker response about the grades and everything, or a confirmation. And also you have the option, I've already responded to a couple people who've sent their papers in early, but you need to say that you're doing that. And tonight would be the cutoff. So tomorrow you'd hear back from me, because I have to teach a class tonight till after 9:30. And by the time I, stay after class for questions, it'll be too late to go out to my studio and look at emails. But if you sent me one as a sample, well, even maybe I could see it before my 6 o'clock class that I teach tonight. Maybe, but by tomorrow at the latest. That would be for me to give you feedback. In any case, when you send them in, make sure that you do it that way. I just held up the instructions. You've seen that before. I sent everyone the cover sheet. It does say, I double checked the right cover sheet, paper number 2. So that should be attached in digitally, of course, in the same PDF file when you send your papers in. Okay, I think this is one of those things that can only happen in sometimes in fiction, when it imitates life. My best friend in high school, I lost touch with over 40 years ago, probably closer to 45. He's the kind of person everyone I hope has had in your life, a kind of friend who's always there for you throughout our mutual parents' divorces and my brother running away, the one that's been homeless now for about 40 years. And all kinds of other things in the usual type. And then Vietnam, the war in Vietnam, that's what really marked his first few years after high school, because he was drafted and he decided to join the Marines. I mean, I said, well, why would he do that? How dumb is that? No, it was a wise choice, because the Marines were the only branch of the US military that had been pulled out of Vietnam in the year we graduated from high school. So it was a wise choice. He went to Hawaii for a few months. I got a few letters from him. And then suddenly Nixon invades Cambodia in 1970. We're 71, it was 70. And guess what? The 1 Marine division sent in to back up that, invasion was my friends. The first night he was in Vietnam, he was playing cards with his sergeant and some other members of his outfit in an underground bunker. And that bunker was hit by a VC, Viet Cong rocket. And he was temporarily buried under. Luckily, he was just bruised and he survived. But I think a couple of people in that same bunker didn't. It was his first night or second night in Vietnam. So he survived that. And then he came back and decided to go into a career to help people. And he got a PhD in psychology. I think it was. It could have been psychiatry, but I think it was psychology, to help people who had been through trauma, PTSD. Of course, a lot of American soldiers who came back from Vietnam had that. So, of course, he did too, but he dealt with it in a very constructive way. I really respected and admired him for that. So the last few times I saw him, he was dealing with astronauts who were going to the moon. And guess one of them he dealt with, right, was the second guy from the moon who got out of the first spaceship that we sent, the first, Apollo 11. I'm not mentioning my friend's name because he might not want me to. I just got a letter from him today after over 40 years saying he's alive and well and living in some rural town in Texas. And the letter that I'd sent him 4 years ago just got forwarded to him. Hey, the U.S. Post Office still works. Anyway, the point is that he helped Buzz Aldrin. If you don't know who he is, look him up. He had an autobiography that was a bestseller, a documentary done on him. He was the second man out of that Apollo craft. And guess what? That guys, as brave as he was, I mean, they were risking their lives. Obviously, all those astronauts were. As soon as he got back down to Earth, because Neil Armstrong got to go out first, that wasn't the call of the astronaut. They didn't take, pull straws. It was the military, whoever ran the, NASA, I'm sorry, that made the decision. Who goes first, who goes second? So Buzz Aldrin's father, when he got back, who was a hard-nosed, high military type, high brass, they called him, said, why weren't you the first one out of that spacecraft, and hung up on his own son? So his son had major problems after his return from the Earth, and he started drinking. And my friend helped him out of that. My friend helped the second man on the moon to overcome his own form of PTSD. And that's about the last time I heard from him. That was in the late 70s or early 80s. And so just now I got a letter from him. He's alive and well, and he's with the same wife he had before, and they're living in East Texas, where Sheldon from Bang Theory comes from. It's as far away from where we grew up in Southern California, or where I went to high school, I should say, as either of us would imagine. But anyway, he's happy and healthy, and I'll be getting in touch with him soon. That's it. That's why I was delayed. The letter arrived right before my daughter ran up to me and said, look, you got a letter from your long lost friend. So my apologies for the late start. All right. Okay, so let's talk about tonight. I start to say tonight. Most of my classes are tonight. Today's topic, which is Romanesque, and Wednesday, of course, Romanesque architecture and sculpture. So Romanesque art. So I've done these. I know they're kind of amateur hour, but they're better than in some cases. I've been able to do this. Is the neatest I could do for you. I'm going to hold it up and leave it, because this is something you'll be expected to at least do a true false answer on, and almost certainly one of the slides of the slide essays for the final will have to do with Romanesque architecture. So here we are, the three main features of Romanesque churches. All right, they are, and they're listed on your list of terms, so you should have them in front of you, but I'm illustrating them, and you'll see them as we go through the slides, of course, examples of the details. Concentric rounded arches, that means one arch within another, and that makes them stronger, and they can support much taller towers than any Roman arch could. So it's the same concept as the Romans, the rounded arches they use, but much more sturdy, because they're a double arch, if you want to call it that. But the right word is concentric. Then, of course, they're rounded arches. And then my favorite feature, the easiest one, my students say, I've seen students years after they took this class say, I remember you're saying about short columns. Well, that's the type of column you'll see, not the tall, narrow Roman and Greek temple columns, but stubby ones. Let's see. I need to let in Elijah. There we go. Hi, Elijah. You didn't miss anything. We're just starting. I'm holding up the. We haven't started the slide yet. I'm holding up the three features in my own illustration of them that you should know, certainly, for the final, because they're bound to come up on the final exam. So short stubby columns may sound like a phrase that doesn't make sense, but it will when you see them. And then the third feature, you can't illustrate this way. You have to be looking at a slide of an actual interior of a Romanesque church, which we're going to see. So the third feature is Romanesque groined vaulting. And again, that phrase may sound funny, but it's not my phrase. Groined in architecture means where the ceiling of a building, whatever style it is, comes together, where the overlapping they are actually overlapping arches. Whether if they're pointed arches, then it's Gothic. We'll see those next week. Gothic groin vaulting, but we're on the earlier period. So a little context. Allow me to, if you don't mind, just to get my throat wet here. Okay, what does Romanesque mean? Well, of course, the word has a root from Rome and Roman times. So I just mentioned the arches, which are something the Romans had used. Now, they didn't invent the arch. Remember, the rounded arch, or any kind of arch, they perfected and used them in many new ways for their aqueducts and things we saw before the midterm. So the idea is that arches were used all the way back to even Etruscan times. Most people think they invented the arch. So they've been around for, by the time we get to what we're talking about, Romanesque is a period from around 900 to 1200. I mentioned this last week with the early medieval side. You don't have to know those years, just for your information. So it's mid-medieval. The other way to say it is mid-medieval, but it is the first period or of two major periods, the second one being Gothic, which we're going to spend a couple of weeks on because there's so incredible Gothic cathedrals and other large Gothic buildings. Before Gothic, that's late medieval, was the mid-medieval style called Romanesque, where the details were influenced by, if not copied from, but similar to Roman architecture. But as I just said, they advanced the technology beyond what the Romans could, because they had these incredibly tall towers. You're going to see some samples. Like the very first slide will be one of the tallest Romanesque church towers in Europe. So they advanced the technology that over what the Romans could do. To the tallest buildings in ancient Rome were the Colosseum, 160 feet, and a couple of other, I think, the aqueduct in Pont de Garde in France. Those were about 160 feet. That's as tall as Roman structures could go. But you could go about twice that high for the towers of a Romanesque style church. And if you think that style is just, it is for our class a part of the past. That's what we're covering is now mid-medieval art, and we'll see sculpture too. We won't get to the sculpture till Wednesday probably. Drive sometime down Van Ness, the new bus line in the middle of the street. Be careful, you can get a ticket easily. I heard that from one of my students. If you're in San Francisco and you can drive or take a bus, the new bus line that goes right down the middle of Van Ness, what isn't that, the longest boulevard in the city of San Francisco? You're going to see at least 4 or 5 Romanesque revival churches from the pre-earthquake, because they're made out of stone and it would have been outlawed after the 06 quake. Today is the anniversary, you know that, right? April 18th, 1906 is 116 years since the earthquake that destroyed. So I saw somebody on the news last night saying 80% of the city, BS, 80% of San Francisco wasn't destroyed, a huge chunk of it. Most people say a third. That's a huge percentage of any big city, but it wasn't 80%. Just, take a look at all the pre-1906 houses scattered throughout not scattered, but dominating neighborhoods throughout San Francisco. So anyway, a third of the city was destroyed, but some of those stone churches, for whatever reason, maybe they were damaged or weakened, but they survived, and they're still, some of them are functioning, not just Catholic. I think 2 or 3 of them are, and maybe a couple other Protestant ones, but they're just the style we're talking about, exactly, with the short stubby columns, the Romanesque rounded concentric arches. And if you were to go inside, you'd see these. My internet connection, let's see, I've got my, hang on, there we go. I hope that's right now, done. It's supposed to storm up there and then down here by the end of my evening class, but it shouldn't affect this afternoon class. It could even be heavy rain for a change, which we need. Okay, so let's get to the screen share. We're going to get started with our first must know slide just now. Okay, let's get this full screen. And so, good. Can you guys all see this? Yes?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's always helpful. All right, so on your syllabi or syllabus for each of you individually, I reversed the order of this particular, I don't reversed it. I told you I reserved the right to alter the order in which a slide appears within the same topic. I'll never switch, between topics. That wouldn't be appropriate because it would be confusing and would make it harder for you to take notes or study for the final. So this is the first architecture slide on my list for week 13, of course, of Romanesque art and architecture. So obviously this is architecture. All right, so this is Toulouse Cathedral. 2 words, Toulouse Cathedral, and that's Toulouse. And of course, I think everyone knows how to spell cathedral, right? And then the location is France, because Toulouse is a city, a large city in southern France. That's why it's named Toulouse Cathedral. Toulouse Cathedral, location France, and the date is 1080 or 1080 CE or AD if you use the old method. So this is a cathedral. Now we have more definitions than we usually do because of this and next week's topics having to do with specific features of a architecture. So I will say these definitions are going to come up in at least two of these four definitions. Well, if you include that list I just gave you, I'd held up the diagram of the three main features of Romanesque architecture. That definitely is going to be on at some point, it'll be on the probably the true false section of the final. But at least one of these next three definitions will also be on there. Okay, so here we go. I'll say them slowly and repeat them. And then if anyone needs me to clarify or repeat yet again, please say so. Okay, what is a cathedral? This is a cathedral, okay? A cathedral is the most important and usually the largest Christian church in a given city, in a particular city, right? Not all cities have cathedrals, so that's why we say in a certain city or given city. I'll say the first part again and repeat the whole thing, but I'm finished with it. It's a two-part definition, one line, two sections. Okay, once again, the first part is cathedral is the most important and usually largest Christian church in a given city, or you can say specific city if you prefer, comma, over which a bishop presides. That's the key factor, over which a bishop, right? I think you all know B-I-S-H-O-P, over which a bishop presides, not with an R, but P, right? That means that the bishop might live near the cathedral that he presides over. By the way, some denominations, non-Catholics though, of course, other Christian denominations that have bishops that began having female bishops. You may know that, but not the Catholic Church. And back then, Western Europe, there were no Protestants. It was just if you were Christian, you were Catholic. So at this point, all of them were men. So I'll say it again, that definition. A cathedral was the most important and usually the largest Christian church in a specific, or you could say given city, comma, over which a bishop presided. The importance of that is that the bishop is a higher rank than any priest is going to be, and the bishop would have authority over a whole region, not just one city or just one church, like maybe the head priest would have in a Catholic church, and that isn't a cathedral. So any cathedral is going to be like the headquarters. You could say it that way. I mean, that's not part of the definition, but it's kind of like the headquarters or main church for that region. And back then we're talking about Catholic. So in that Catholic diocese, you don't have to know that word. That's more detailed than you need. But some of you know this, if you're like me, a lapsed or maybe even practicing Catholic, you know these things, but you don't have to know the details. Just the fact that a bishop has the authority over a whole region of other churches, but the church that bishop is associated with or attached to is the cathedral. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at cathedral. Now, that may seem like a lot of minute detail. Why go into that? Because the bishops in this period, we're talking about mid-medieval or Romanesque period, designed their own cathedrals. They were usually, not always, but usually the architects of these buildings. And that has an influence on how tall those towers they had were. This is a nearly 300-foot tall tower. I'm going to show you several views I was able to find on the internet, but look at that. It's a massive tower. No Roman or earlier period of architecture, whether they were churches or colosseums, or it could ever build a structure with a tower, at least that would be anywhere near that tall. Romans had towers, but they were usually used for military purposes or outlooks, gates in front of a city or something. But they never got over about 150 or 60 feet. This is nearly 300 feet, this tower. Okay, so that's only possible because, well, let me keep that view, close-up view here, because of the combination of the concentric rounded arches. Everywhere you look, you see where the cursor is. You should be able to see that there's an arch over or within, I prefer to say an arch within an arch. You can say double arches, but that's not really the right way to put it. So they're concentric arches all the way up the tower, except up here, they've made them pointed, but only in the last two stages. So all the other arches, all the way down to let's go down to the full view. This one here, you see on the apse. Now, you know what an apse is. That word will come up almost certainly. It will on the final. So the apses, there's several. You see, that's an apse. It's and there's three of them here. There's a small round one here. Then the largest apse is the one in the middle, and then the one above is the tall and narrow one. They all have the concentric rounded arch windows. So now I'm going to do, before we go on with the rest of the notes on the meaning, and then, of course, the formal notes, I'm going to show you some other views that I found on the internet. This is interesting. It's the same church looking at a much different angle. I like this photo, but it's not as direct a view. So I think it would be better. And it's harder to tell that the tower is so tall. You know, it might not be obvious because the distorted angle of this photo, but it is a nice photo. You see the concentric rounded arches here. And then the short stubby columns are what you see when you look up closely. These columns aren't even, not even close, maybe a third the height, right, in terms of how tall they are, of a Greek or Roman temple column would be. And the same is true on the tower. Those are not as fat or stubby as the ones on the apses, but they are still short. So short and usually stubby columns. I just say short, stubby. Okay, let's look at another view. Actually, I think I had one before this. Yeah, here's the way the church looks from the entrance. When you enter, it's on the opposite side of that first photo we were looking at. I'm going to confirm, I always do, which photo it would be on the final, and it will be the first one I started with and I'll end with. If I have this, which I'm not cutting. Oh, I'm sorry. I always got to remind myself to tell you guys that you should make notes of the fact this is one of those slides that's so important. I'm definitely not cutting it. Actually, that slide, let me get it, is this one, that view. Okay, and I'll repeat that before we finish with the formal analysis. Okay, but I just thought you'd like to see how these massive buildings, they were almost like a fortress. In fact, that's not an accident. These buildings were often attacked by invading armies or even marauding bands of criminals, thieves, who had their own, armies, and so they could often be, shelter for the townspeople to hide in. And it's called sanctuary. You don't have to write any of this now. I'm just saying you could see it looks almost like a fortress. These walls are massively thick. But if that's all there was, it wouldn't be a cathedral. The cathedral always has, at least in the Romanesque style, a tall one or more. It could have more than one tall towers with a tapering spire above that. So you see that. Now let's go just see a couple more views. That's how it looks set in the city. That's, from obviously somewhere. It's an old photo from an aerial perspective. And then this gives you an idea of those apses, how they support. You see the smaller ones support the biggest one, which then again supports that tall, narrow, right one. And all of those apses together support this. You can imagine it's a massively heavy tower. Without all those apses, it would have collapsed. And did these ever collapse? Oh, yeah. Some of the towers in these early Romanesque churches and later on in the Gothic style cathedrals would collapse and kill people. It didn't happen that often, but it did occasionally. And here's another way to see how the whole structure lines up, with the tower being the most massive. We'll do the formal elements, of course, the biggest mass. A little more detail of those short, stubby columns again, and the concentric rounded arches. You see them all the way up the walls and all the apses and most of the tower. I think that's the last. I might have one more. Oh yeah, at night. And just another detail of it. These are nice photos. I just thought I'd share them. Okay, so that's the interior, but we'll get to that later. Okay, let's get back to the main view, which if it's on the exam, remember, this is the slide you'll see, okay? All right, so what else is important about the meaning of this is that these bishops, I just said a moment ago, so this is the last part, but it's an important part of the meaning. These bishops would compete with each other to have the tallest towers in that kingdom, or that whole area, you could say, or a region of Europe. And in France, where the Romanesque style caught on early, there's no debating this. There are records to show that when one cathedral would be finished with one of their tall towers, like this one, then the next cathedral built in that same country or kingdom would almost always have a taller tower than the previous one. In other words, it was a competition a running or ongoing, you could say it either way, competition between bishops of different cathedrals to make sure their towers were taller. Now, why? Can anybody guess why they had these tall towers? There are two reasons. One is religious, and the other is not religious, more personal. Can anybody guess why would these towers be so tall, or why would they these churches, this style of church, have these tall towers? What they were supposed to symbolize? Anybody? Somebody must have an idea. What could they be? There's no right or wrong here. I'm just asking you. What impression would you give as a well, why would a church want to, or an architect, the bishop being the architect, feel
It
the
could be
need?
like either their devotion to God or
Yep.
their power.
Both.
They're like, yeah.
Bingo, 100%. Yeah, excellent. Everybody hear that? There were two reasons. One is, yes, it's showing the religious devotion is a good word, or you could say fervor, passion even. The devotion's about as good a word. That the worshipers who entered these churches were supposed to look up at these towers, or even before they would, on days they weren't going to church, and feel inspired to think of God, think of heaven. So they're pointing towards heaven symbolically, and they should inspire religious devotion. Excellent statement there. And then the other part you also mentioned is the other half is it's a personal statement of power on the part of the bishops. If my tower is taller than your tower, then I'm more powerful than that other bishop. So I call it, now some of you know Freud, right, his theory of certain male competition about body parts. I won't get graphic. So I call this a case of tower envy. You can use any word you want if you don't want to use that word, but you can, because that's really what we're talking about. These guys were trying to show off that they were more important, more powerful, and therefore deserve more respect from all the other bishops and all of their congregations, their worshipers. So the taller the tower, the more powerful you were. Yeah, it's a statement of personal power and importance. And you can call it tower envy or anything else you want, but it's not an assumption or exaggeration. It's well documented that was what was happening in all these new cathedrals being built. By the way, these took longer than usually the lifetime of a bishop. Occasionally, a bishop could live to be like 80 or 90. That happened, and then they might see the completion of a tower. But even if the bishop knew they wouldn't live to see the tower finished, it was a statement, and everyone would know, oh, that's going to be a taller tower than the one in the next city over, the other cathedral nearby, or any other around them. So the taller the tower, the more important or powerful the bishops were, or at least that's what they were trying to state. So yeah, it's symbolic both politically, or you could say personally, and religiously. Okay, that's plenty on the meaning. By the way, can you tell some of you this is a really old picture? I got this on some French photographer, but these are all hooky looking French cars. Look at these. Some of those might still be on the street, but it's probably a 50-year-old site. But that town, I've only been there once for briefly over, hasn't changed much. I didn't get to go inside this church, but I did get to see it. It's very impressive. Anything around it is anywhere near as tall as this tower. Okay, here we go with the formal analysis. It is balanced, no question, left to right. And the tower, if you divide it, is right in the middle. And of course, it would be symmetrical. But obviously, it's unbalanced or weighted toward the bottom. The colors are both warm and cool. They are warm on the red brick. Let's get a little closer. Cool on the white stone for the columns, and cool on the gray tiles. But the gray tile, that's actually slate. You can say slate if that's the right term. It's slightly different than tiles, but if you said tiles, you'd get credit. The gray roof covering, or specifically slate or tiles. Slate is a kind of tile. And then that alternates with the main body of the churches. So on the obviously apsis is cool roof color, and on the rest of the building is the warm red tile. So it's just pretty much an even use of both warm and cool colors. The textures are the real rough texture of brick, of course, and stone, and the real smooth texture of window or glass, right? Obviously in the windows, and the tiles are all smooth textures. So you've got two real smooth textures and two real rough textures. Then we have for mass, it's pretty obvious. The tower is the largest mass. And then it would be the nave, which we haven't talked about, and we're going to define it when I show you a slide of the interior. I think it's the next must know of a church with the view of what a nave is. But for now, just write it this way: the long aisle or nave. That's not the correct full definition of what a nave is, but just say the main aisle if you want to say it that way, the main aisle of the church. And just to make the point, I'm going to go ahead and show you that aerial view. You see, that's the nave. So that is the second largest, because it ends right here, right? These are separate sections. The third largest mass would be the main crossing, it's called. You don't have to say it. You can say the wings in below the tower. So let's go back to that view again. That's what you'll see. So this section here is the second, third largest mass. So again, the largest mass, clearly it's a tower. Then it's the main aisle or nave, the right word is N-A-V-E. And then we have the third largest mass would be the wings on either side. Okay, and then we have the obvious rhythm of the concentric or rounded arches. And then we have the columns, of course, and the apses themselves. They're rounded. All of these are not, octagonal or hexagonal. They're all rounded. So that creates obviously a lot of rhythm. All the way up the tower, you have the arches and the columns in between them. So there's a lot of rhythm. And then we have modeling. It's just, of course, the natural shadows from the sun. And then we have it stable on the corners of the building, dynamic on the apses and all the windows. The tower is both, right? Because obviously it's got these sharp corners or edges, but the spire, just the upper part, that's dynamic. So it's both. And for space, it's one large, open, long aisle. That's what the nave is. And I'll give you the full definition of nave, like I said, with the next slide. So just say it's one large, open, long aisle with smaller side aisles and a tower that's open. You can look up to see the inside of the tower. So, and an open tower that reaches the height of nearly, or you can just say about 300 feet. So you actually have a space that's, above way above the top of the main church ceiling. So if you stood right there, right below the tower, you could look this way, that way, and down the aisle, and you could see, these huge spaces. So once again, I'll repeat that with space. It's all real space, of course, and that is one long open aisle and smaller side aisles, and then an open tower that reaches nearly 300 feet, a height of nearly 300 feet. Now, the lines here are visual lines, of course, along the outer edges, right, of the windows and at the corners. I think textures. Yeah, finally, textures here are, did I do that? Real smooth textures? Yeah, I did, didn't I do? Yeah, on the tiles, they're smooth on the two kinds of roof tiles, and on the windows, and of course, rough on the stone and the brick. Okay, moving on to the next must know. Okay, so the next one we're going to see is the nave of Saint Etienne. And if I recall correctly, we have to go, oh yeah, this is where it gets, okay. The slides were put together by a really helpful slide librarian, but she kind of did them in a different order than I asked for. See, there's that one again. Okay, just a quick aside. You have to write this not on the syllabus. Now, let's wait till the internet connection says it's unstable. Let's wait till that goes away, hopefully quickly. Good. Okay, so this is a small church. It's in some little town in central France. I happened to get out of a train. It's not my slide, but out of a train, for a few minutes. We had like a half hour or something. So I walked over across the plaza and look at this. I saw this. I didn't take my own slides of it though. But you see the Romanesque concentric arches here. There's 4 of them, right? And then the rest of them on the facade are just the traditional arches, one within another. So the double arches are 2 arches, right? And then you see the short stubby columns. This is a small church and not a cathedral in a town in central France. So you see how Romanesque style, in others, wasn't only used for cathedrals. It was used for palaces, fortresses, or castles, you could say, palaces, castles, and smaller churches as well as cathedrals. Okay, so now we're going to see this. This is the next must-know. Okay, here we go. This is the nave of Saint or Saint Etienne, and that's ST period. You can write the full word out, SAINT, if you prefer, but most of the time, most places that use the word saint in the Western world just abbreviate it, like the town St. Louis is always ST period. So again, the title is Nave, Nave, of Saint, ST period. Etienne was the name of this saint. Of course, capital ETIENNE. The location is Caen, CAEN. It's a city in France. Caen, 1133. Again, all these dates are common era, so you don't have to write that. So this slide also has a high possibility of coming up on the final, because it's the only slide I have of a Romanesque style interior. Now, this used to be a cathedral. And in fact, I think I gave you guys a break. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I cut this. I should probably not have, but so you don't have to take notes on this view of it. That's the same church from obviously the facade, the exterior, as you walk up towards the entrance. Look at those massive towers. See how Romanesque churches could have even more than one of these towers. This is about 280 feet, these towers, close to the height of the one we started with. And those fortress-like, really thick stone walls that were meant to, resist attack, and they often were attacked. This city was a very wealthy city on the coast of northern France. There's a smaller, there's another Cannes Film Festival, you may have heard, it's their version of the Academy Awards. That's a very different city on the south coast of France. And this is in the north, where there was fighting with England all the time. The British actually, or English rather, invaders often took over this town and kept it for, many decades. And then they'd lose it again to the French. So there was a lot of wars, is the point. You don't have to write any of this. I'm just showing you, look at this massive structure. And these towers are so heavy that they wouldn't have survived all these centuries if it weren't for the concentric rounded arches and the thick walls. But the third thing, now back to this, so you do need to take notes, is these Romanesque groin vaulting, where the ceiling has this particular feature. So I'm going to you can just listen for a couple minutes, and then I'll restate what elements inside this, if this slide is on the essay part of the final. I'm not saying it will be, but I won't be cutting it for the study list. So let's get up close. Can you see that these arches following the cursor are rounded and they intersect? Another way of saying what a groin is where the arches on the ceiling of a building intersect or meet. You can see the point there where my arrow is pointing to. I think you guys can see my cursor, right? I assume that you can on your screens, right? So these are rounded arches that all intersect at the meeting point. It's called the groining or groin of just, like a human body has, right? So this is the strongest method of supporting the weight. And you just saw how massive those towers are on the outside. And they are, of course, supported by the roof. And then obviously that means inside by the ceiling that's below them. And without those, again, Romanesque groin vaults or vaulting, the series of them, of course, taken together is vaulting, all the way down the nave, those towers would have not been possible. They probably even finished building. They would have collapsed a long time ago. If they finished them, they wouldn't have stayed up there that long. So Romanesque groin vaulting is the third feature of all Romanesque style churches. And then you have your concentric rounded arches are very obvious here, aren't they? And these stubby columns, the further up you go along the wall, there are 3 rows of these. The words, a row of arches is an arcade. You don't have to know that word, but just you can say a row of arches. Each row of arches becomes shorter, and the columns are even stubbier the further you go. But even down here, these are relatively stubby. We're talking about by comparison to a Greek or Roman temple where the columns are 50 or 60 feet high. So your short, stubby columns in your Romanesque concentric arches, and then your Romanesque groin vaulting. All 3 put together make this church much stronger. This style of architecture, for any Romanesque church, much stronger, much sturdier. It can support much heavier weight. obviously on both the roof itself and the towers above the roof. Okay, but what's a nave? There's a word I guarantee will come up at some point on the final. And it's not a long definition. Nave, right there. It's the second one on that same page below cathedral on your list of terms. A nave is the long central aisle of a Christian church. So it doesn't only apply to Catholic churches or cathedrals. So I'll say it again. It's the long central aisle of a Christian church within which the worshipers sit facing the altar. I'll say it again. It's the long central aisle of a Christian church within which the worshipers sit facing the altar. The altar is where the priest or a minister, if it's Protestant churches have naves too, so it could be either a minister or priest, whoever's conducting, or the bishop if they're bishops usually didn't do the services themselves except on special holidays, because they were busy going back and forth to Rome to talk to the Pope or whatever else, dealing with politics. But a bishop could have presided. So just say, again, I'll repeat that a nave is the long central aisle of a Christian church within which the worshipers sit facing the altar. And that would be at the end, you see there, very end of this aisle or nave. The side aisles are important too, but that's not part of the definition. I mean, every church that has a nave, even modern ones, well, some modern ones don't do this, yeah, but how do people get to their seats? Oh, if it's not obvious, I always forget to mention this, or I almost always do. And then I have to remind myself, you probably are wondering, those are not the original seats. Those aren't medieval folding chairs. They didn't have them, of course. There were no seats in these churches. I would put that down as part of the meaning. It might surprise you. There were no seats except for the wealthy who would get to sit in their own private pews, sort of like, wooden benches, right? At the front, closest to the altar, closest to the priest or whoever the bishop was giving the service. They had permanent seating, but everyone else, you brought your own. In other words, you either sat on the floor or stood, or you could bring, of course, people did have pillows or, portable objects they could use to sit on. So you would have to provided your own seating or just sat on the floor during most of the Middle Ages. By the way, anybody ever going to Greek Orthodox or Russian and Ukrainian, right, and Serbian, all those variations of the Greek Orthodox religion, we talked about that's the other term for it is the Byzantine Christian churches. You have to stand the whole time. Everybody, doesn't matter how wealthy and powerful you might be, there are no seats in a Greek Orthodox. I've been in a dozen or more. Maybe some of them have started doing that, but you were just expected to be devoted enough to the church that you didn't mind standing for an hour or two. But here you would have probably been able to sit on the floor. Bay of Hail, did I say that right? Yeah, right. Hay, a bale of hay. I said hail. That's another possible seating. So you don't have to write the details, but just say that people had to provide their own seating or sat on the floor, most of them. Okay, and then the last thing about the meaning here would be that this is no longer a cathedral because it has been decommissioned, meaning that's why the title doesn't say cathedral. When it was built, this was the cathedral of that city of Caen, this fairly medium size, it's a decent sized city, a couple 100,000 people, you have to know that, but it's not a small town. Cathedrals wouldn't be in small towns, they'd be in good sized cities. So in the Middle Ages, the Romanesque era, right, mid-medieval era, these cathedrals would be built in the most powerful or important cities in that region, and the bishop would preside. So now, for some reason, the bishop, I don't know the reason, doesn't matter, has decided that that church isn't important enough to be the cathedral, so they probably build a newer one somewhere else. Some other style. But this isn't now, I cut it off the list, so you don't have to know this. Okay, let's do our formal analysis. All right, it's balanced. Yes, it's totally symmetrical. But some people would say it's weighted toward the bottom because the floor looks to be wider than the groin vaulted ceiling. But if you add the portions of the ceiling on either side, right, for the side, it's the same. So it's balanced left to right, top to bottom. Okay, so there's balance here. There's the rhythm is obvious with the Romanesque rounded or concentric rounded arches, the short stubby columns, and the groin vaulting, all of which are repeated, all the way through the whole church. See, it even continues those groin vaultings all the way back to the very back end here. And then the largest mass, well, this I would say it's the floor, because the floor covers the entire interior, right? It's one mass. So I would say in this view, it's the floor, then the ceiling, the groin vaulted or central ceiling. And then it's the lower row of arches, right? Or the lower section of the wall between each column. Now, see, these are tall, narrow columns, but they're just meant to, visual. They're not structural. They just divide each row of arches or each section. So the third largest mass would be each of the largest arches or lowest row of arches. Then there's the color. It's all cool here. I don't see anything warm. Cool gray and then blue. And I guess that's off-white on the floor tiles. Not sure if they're original, but that's what we have to write about is what's in here. Not the chairs. They are warm, but they're not original, so ignore them. Okay, and then it's dynamic on the ceiling and the arches, of course, stable on the walls, the floor, and the columns, right? Okay, and then we have modeling is just the shadows from the sun, of course, mostly visible on the two sides. You can't see this side, but it'd be exactly the same. Created by the sun, so the natural modeling shadows behind there, you can say, along each side aisle, and then up at the ceiling too. Again, natural modeling from shadows of the sun. And then we have for space, surprisingly, excuse me, sorry, I need to take a second, 5 seconds. There we go. The fact is, it's not a very tall nave. Most naves are much taller than this. This is only 60 feet tall. And the towers are what, 3 times that, or more than 3 times that, several times that. So again, you'll have to remember this slide, but just you can see that's about right. Yeah, the nave is about 60 feet. Well, I know that's correct, but the towers are over 240 feet. I think the 300, they're more like 240 or so. So the ceiling here, the real space, again, just for this slide, is a ceiling of about one large, long, or just say one long open room with 2 side aisles and a ceiling about 60 feet tall. That's how the space is. And then we have the textures, or the real rough texture of stone, and I guess smooth texture of tile on the floor, right? And then real rough texture of brick. If you look up at the ceiling, it's actually stucco over brick. So now it's smooth. It depends on which view. This is the newest slide I can find. So now it's smooth stucco texture. You don't have to talk about the windows. You can't see them from here. The line is a visual line with the vaulting and of course, the edges of each arch. You've got visual line, not carved or painted line. And let's see. I think it's balanced. Yeah, rhythm. Let's see, color, the rhythm. Oh, stable. Yeah, the walls are stable. I guess I already said that, right? The arches are dynamic. I keep thinking I'm forgetting something. Color, texture, modeling, rhythm. I think we covered it all. Okay, so we're going to end a little early. I don't think anybody object to that. We're going to do one more must-own and we'll see how it goes, but I'll stick around, of course, as always, for any questions you have. I'm trying to decide if I should do Bayeux tapestry. Oh, wow, that is so important. Well, you know what? Let's do this because we're on architecture. Yeah, because I definitely will not cut this one. This, if you had to pick from today's lecture, the most likely possible slide to appear on the final, that'd be this one. And so I would say a probability of being on the final. Okay, so let's do this, and then that'll take us till maybe 5 or 6 or 7 minutes after 4, and we'll end a little early. This is the cathedral complex at Pisa. Cathedral, you already know, complex at Pisa, P-I-S-A, Italy, and the date is 1350. Well, why is this so important? Because some of you already know some of the facts about this. It's a World Heritage, UNESCO, you get to say UN for short, because UNESCO is part of the UN or UNESCO World Heritage Site for the probably obvious reason. If it's not obvious and you don't know this, you should write it, because of the world famous Leaning Tower. Now, what does that mean? Well, that would be the bell tower of this cathedral complex. The complex is 3 buildings. We're looking at all 3 in this slide. We have the bell tower, the cathedral, and the baptistry. Now, I think I gave you guys a break and cut that word. Yeah, I did, as a term. So you don't have to know it's a separate term. It won't appear on the true false section of the final, but it could be if this slide is on, you would need to know what it is. A baptistry is a separate building in front of a cathedral in which is somebody trying to get in? That's what I'm guessing. Here, let me just, somebody's still trying to get in here. Yeah, I'm sorry. Quentin just joined us, yeah, or rejoined us. Okay, sorry, we just started this. This is the last must know and the most important slide for today. It has the highest probability of being on the final. This is Cathedral Complex at Pisa, P-I-S-A. Please don't spell it P-I-Z-Z-A. Italy, 1350. The date is wrong, but I'll explain that in a minute. It's part of the meeting. We were just starting to talk about the 3 structures. What does the complex mean? It means the 3 buildings in this slide. The bell tower, the most famous one in the world, right? The Leaning Tower of Pisa. I know many restaurants use that, pun with the misspelling is the food, not the city. But that's, by the way, Pisas did not come from Pisa. They came from southern Italy, from Naples. You have to know that. If you're curious, there's no connection between the food and the city. Okay. So the Leaning Tower or bell tower, the cathedral, and then the baptistry. I was just about to tell you, what is that? What is part of the meaning of this slide? A baptistry is a separate building in front of a cathedral in which baptisms were performed. That's literally why it's called a baptistry with a P. But baptisms, right, is when you dunk a baby in water. I'm sorry. Well, that's basically what goes on. Like I told you, I used to be Catholic, so I've seen plenty of these. So what you have is a 3-part complex of 3 structures, all of which are part of the same Romanesque style compound or complex. So one new term, though, is on the cathedral. What is this? Well, I think Stockstead says this, and she's got it wrong. I'm sorry, architecture is my area of expertise. She calls it a dome. No, it's not a dome. You could say it's a small dome, but that's misleading and not accurate. The right word is our last new term for today, a cupola, C-U-P-O-L-A, a cupola. And what is a cupola? Okay, a cupola is a small room resting on top of a roof or a dome. A cupola is a small room resting on top of a roof or a dome. So if this obviously is resting on the roof of the cathedral, and there's nothing above it, that would be a separate little room like a cupola. It's not a dome, it's a cupola. I'll give you a comparison if you know some of it. I don't know if there's still, are there in-person classes at the Petaluma campus? I think so, right? At least I've read that there were. I haven't been on that campus since before the pandemic. Anyways, taught every semester there. You just walk along that campus, especially at night, and look at the top of all the buildings. They all have cupolas. They're rooms. My daughter called them the marijuana room. We took the elevator up all the way once. That's a 3rd level, right? Where there are no classrooms, obviously. I don't know what goes on up there, but it smelled a little bit funny. So, and those rooms are probably just, maintenance or ventilation rooms, whatever. But they're cupolas. They're rooms resting on top of the roof of the larger building. So this is a cupola. The cupolas were used from, this period, mid-medieval, right, Romanesque, all the way through the Renaissance. You'll see if you take our 2.2 or 1.2, a lot of cupolas on Renaissance cathedrals, but they first appeared in the Romanesque period. They're not on most Romanesque churches, though. That's why they're not one of the 3 main features. But what are? Well, here we go. Your Romanesque, right? Arches, concentric rounded arches. You especially notice them above the 3 main doors, and these short stubby columns, and they definitely fit that definition. The same on the Leaning Tower. You see the same all the way up of these same Romanesque concentric arches and short stubby columns. And then finally on the baptistry, the reason the date that Stockstead uses, I'm trying to make it easier for everyone, because if you're using the textbook to create flashcards or just to look at to study from or during the test, of course, you can have it open. I don't want to confuse the issue, but she's not, that's not accurate. This complex was finished in the late 1100s, and you could add as a last one of the last two facts about the meaning. And the other is, why is a tower leaning? I think some of you may know. It's a myth about what happened with the tower. There's a lot of misinformation. We'll get to that in just a moment. But the last thing to say about the style and the period is this building was Romanesque and had nothing else on it until the 1300s, when some later bishop decided to put Gothic pointed arches, later decorations. You could just say, you don't have to write the word Gothic because we haven't defined that yet. So you could just say a later bishop added a few decorations in the 1300s, but the complex was done almost 150 years before that, or more than 150, in the late 1100s. You can just keep it simple. In the Romanesque era, in the Romanesque style. So if you imagine this baptistry didn't have these arches and just the concentric, right, rounded ones and the short stubby columns, you'd see the whole thing was totally Romanesque style, all three structures. Last part of the meaning is, why is this tower leaning? Can anybody guess? Anybody guess what the cause could be? There are several possible explanations. Why would a tall structure like this, tilt to one side? What could cause that? Surely somebody has an idea.
The foundation.
That's a reasonable guess, and most people would assume that. And I suppose I would have too before I went in. And I never got to Pisa. I was supposed to go one day, and I had a tour guide who said, would you rather have really great Italian food and wine in a villa, outside Pisa, or do you want to see that tower? I didn't have time to see both, so I chose the former. But I have friends who've been there. That's a good guess, but no, that isn't the reason. But I'll go ahead and just say, well, there are things, some of you know, if you've ever been in a house or any public, most public buildings wouldn't be open if they were leaning this badly. They're too dangerous, right? But any kind of building where the floors aren't even or they're tilting, it's called settling. Now, that's not what you do in life or relationships, but the other kind, the architectural term, to settling. The word settling means that the ground underneath it was unstable, and there was no planning for that before the tower was built. And you could imagine that's an extremely heavy tower. I think I have another view of it. Yeah, pretty sure I do. Yeah, there we go. Look how much it tilts. So the tower began sinking to one side because the ground underneath was not stable. So it's called settling. And the tower would have, here's the last part of the meaning, it's pretty important. The tower would have collapsed a long time ago, or just started cracking and being unsafe. And it is open to the public now. Has anybody been? I don't think anyone here has been to this city, right? One or two, I think, said in this class that they might have gone to Italy, Rome. Anyway, point is that it's open to the public. So what happened is the last part of the meaning now, to the tower to keep it from collapsing. Because if it wasn't at all dealt with, if they did nothing, if the Italian government and the city of Pisa, of course, together, they spent millions of dollars stabilizing the tower. How did they do it? They had metal cables that they very slowly over, I think years, or months or years, just say over a very long time, they slowly pulled the tower halfway upright from where to a full upright, not all the way. Can anybody guess why? There are two reasons why they didn't pull the tower all the way upright. They could have. Why didn't they just do that? Anybody guess? There's a good couple of reasons why they didn't. Again, I'm sure someone has a theory.
It would crack.
Yes. Oh, superb. Yes, that's not an obvious thing. Most people, yeah, it could have cracked and collapsed in a heap of rubble. And the other reason is economic. Some of you already can guess. What could that be? Why they didn't just go ahead and why don't we just make it straight again? Because
tourism.
Yeah, exactly. Excellent. Yes, tourism is the main industry of this town. Why would people even know Pisa? It's not that important a city, and it's not even look at the build out. If you can tell, these are not, Renaissance, even let alone medieval buildings. The city has grown a lot recently, but it's not famous for anything else except this cathedral complex and the tower. Yeah, exactly. If they pulled it up all the way, so the last thing you should have in your notes, to upright, it would have ruined their main source of income, tourism. Why would people go here if the tower wasn't leaning anymore? Plenty of straight towers all over Europe to go see that are bigger, taller, more, cities that were more interesting and famous. So it's their main source of income. And so they said, let's not do that. But also the other practical reason is it would have, as I forget who said that, but you were right, it could have cracked and completely collapsed. I always think of the Wizards of Waverly with, so what's her name? Selma. I can't remember her name. Yeah, the actress that briefly had a singing career. What is her name? I don't know. Yeah, my daughter used to like her. Now doesn't listen to her. Had an episode where they went up in this tower right after it was corrected, and they talked about why didn't they do that, and the characters in that Disney TV show. Okay, so what we have here now, formal analysis, and we'll end early, like I said, are three structures. And so I would say the largest mass, let's just talk about the cathedral, because that's a lot to try and, and that would be the cathedral is the largest mass, if you want to break it down that way. And then the second largest is the tower, and then the baptistry. Why don't we just say it that way? Yeah. The cathedral is the largest mass of these three structures, then the bell tower, and then the baptistry. This is misleading. This photograph makes it look like the baptistry is taller and maybe even almost as wide as the cathedral, but it's a distorted camera angle or lens that was used to get all three structures. The actual height of these structures, so for real space, here we go for space, it's all real. The bell tower is about 145 feet tall. You say nearly 150 or just under 150. The cathedral, the tower is about 110 feet to the top of the cupola. And the baptistry is more like about 70 feet or 80. It's less than 80 feet. And so the tallest structure is the bell tower, then the cupola on the cathedral, and then the baptistry. So there's one large open round room, or the space inside the baptistry, and then one long narrow, we remember the word nave, right? But would apply to this slide if it's on the essay part of the final. And this is the cupola is over 100 feet, so something like close to 110 feet. Because that last 10 feet, so it's altogether probably 120 with that little finial, it's called, that little decoration, but that's not open. So the open space is about 110 feet, just a little over 100. And then the bell tower is, like, I think I read it's 144, it's close to around 140 feet or a little less than 150. And then we have the rhythms, of course, of the Romanesque rounded arches, the columns, right, and the windows and doors on the two main buildings, baptistry, the cathedral. And there is, of course, a small entrance there on the tower. The leaning tower is both dynamic and stable, but the lean makes it, of course, dynamic, the diagonal line of it and the arches, but each individual column is stable. The cathedral is about equal, stable on the corners, obviously the walls, dynamic on the cupola and the arches. The baptistry is almost entirely dynamic. Its shape and the roof and everything is round, and all the arches are. The rhythm is obvious, repeated arches, columns, windows, I guess. Balance. Yes, the cathedral is symmetrical, as almost all medieval churches, not just cathedrals, throughout Europe would be symmetrical, both this period and later when next week we cover Gothic. But it's unbalanced, of course, because it's symmetrical left to right, but unbalanced toward the bottom. The baptistry is really pretty much balanced both ways. If you do a line around the middle of the walls and then down the center of it, it's obviously symmetrical. You could make the case because it gets narrower at the very, very top, but it depends on where you draw the line, I guess. The modeling is, of course, just the shadows from the sun itself, the natural shadows on all three structures. There's no technique for modeling. The colors are cool white on the walls of all three structures, the baptistry, the cathedral, and the tower. And then cool light gray, actually, you can say off-white, it looks more like that on your screen, on the roof coverings. And the roof coverings here, as I recall, they're metal. So we're gonna do the textures. Let me just double check if this shows. No, it didn't show the rest. Yeah, they're metal. You can see it there. So then we have cool colors. The only warm colors are the red tiles on the roof of the baptistry. And I think I said the lines are visual around the corners of the cathedral and at the edges of each of the arches. The textures are real smooth marble on the walls. I believe all three structures. Well, there's some stonework on this, so you could just say real textures of smooth marble on the cathedral, and then I believe it's rough. Yeah, it is. It's rough stone on the tower and the baptistry. And then real smooth glass on all the windows. There are windows on the tower too, all the windows, smooth real texture, and then smooth real texture on the metal and tiles, roof coverings. All three structures have smooth real textures on the roofs. I think that's, yeah, the largest mass. I think I covered that. Yeah, right. And about okay rhythm. All right, so let's do a stop share. So we're ending about 5 minutes early. And now don't forget your papers are due by midnight on Wednesday. And if you want me to give you feedback, you've got to stipulate that if you decide to submit a draft of your paper. I may get to them this evening, but because I have a class in a little while, it needs to set up. But by the time I'm done, I don't think I'll be able to do that. But certainly tomorrow, at least before. So don't wait to send them to me at 4 or 5 in the afternoon if you want feedback. But if you just want to submit them early, that's fine. So you have to stipulate, just say, okay, this is my final draft, or you don't have to say that. If you just submit it, I'll assume that it's your final draft and log it in to be graded. But if you want me to give you feedback, please be very specific and state that. I've already held up the instructions. I think 1 or 2 people joined a little later, but I've done that every class in the last 2 weeks, now 3 weeks. So it's at the beginning of this video. I have been able to post the last week's videos. I did that it was a little after 8 p.m. by the time I got around to them, like 9 or 10 on Friday, in case if you missed one of last week's lectures. They're now all posted on my new channel. Remember, I think I said this to everybody last week. It's Mark Wilson's SRJC Art History Lectures 2. So you have to have the number 2. And then when you go to YouTube, you plug that in, and then you hit filters. It's odd, but that's the next step. And the filters allow you to hit, last week or last month. So you just hit last week or last month, either one, and it'll bring up all the videos since I was booted out unceremoniously of my original channel, which whoever has control of it, I wish them well. I have no reason to know why, but those are still visible. But you know what? I actually should ask, because anybody tried to look at the videos from before last week on my old channel, and I hope you're able to do that. I haven't done that because I've been focused on solving the problem going forward, right, for the remaining weeks. Anybody tried that? Because I want to make sure, if you can,
I
hopefully.
went on the page and they were still uploaded, but I didn't click on the videos, so I honestly don't know.
Yeah, if someone could do that just as a helpful, informational thing for your fellow students. By the way, I offered to give 5 points extra credit to anyone in any of my classes who can send me a link to where I could see if I could convert some of my slides of my travels to beautifully preserved medieval towns all over Western Europe, like Italy, Germany, France, England. I haven't had a chance to convert them to digital. They're all 35 millimeter slides, but there's a piece of equipment in some places I've heard it can be $200 or $300. It's a little more than I would like to spend, and yet if you get the cheapest ones, they don't work well. So if anyone wants to do a quick, I don't know what would it be, Yelp search to see what the most reasonably priced and reliable device is, and I could try to order them from Amazon in time to convert slides that you could see just for your own enjoyment before the final. And I'll give you 5 points if anyone sends me information, whether or not I end up using it, just, for a link that's worth a few minutes of my time to peruse and see if, for that kind of equipment. I don't know what they're called, slide converters, but whatever, it'd be pretty obvious, I'm sorry, to be able to have a home, device that you put a slide in and then do whatever it is, I don't know what happens next, but somehow it gets converted into a digital file while I assume it's plugged in, or into that you plug in a flash drive, and then I have them all on one flash drive. Then I can show you those on my laptop. So that's worth 5 points.
I have a
As well
quick
as all
question.
sorry, any extra credit options, nobody has close to 60. Please go ahead, question.
Sorry to cut you off, Mr. Wilson.
No
I hope
problem.
you get that worked out. But anyways, so last week we went over early medieval art, and in the syllabus it says reading assignment Stockstad chapter 14, but in the book chapter 14 is actually African arts.
I
So-
addressed that.
Oh,
That's a
okay.
good question. Excellent question. I
Okay,
addressed
sorry.
it once, maybe twice, very early on though. And it is in the syllabus, if you take a look. I know
Oh, okay.
the perennial problem because all textbooks, I don't mean just Stockstead, do this to try and generate yearly sales. Oh, it's a new edition. They move
Right.
things around. Maybe they add one slide from a chapter or take one out. It's just, it's kind of a gimmick. And you know how outrageously expensive these textbooks are. So what I was saying is now I may not have put that there. Yeah, I don't think I did on this one. So my apologies. I mentioned it, but I'm gonna, now that you brought it up, it's an important point. The numbers aren't what is important. It's the topics. And you'll see 90% of the slides in the syllabus are, in Stockstead, unless you get an edition
Right.
that's 10 years old. So any edition from, let's say, 2014 or later, what is that, 7 or 8 years ago, should be good. Yeah, no, I have to admit that I need to add that next semester. We have to revise our entire syllabi for a whole bunch of reasons.
I have the 6th edition. I think that's one of the more recent ones.
What year?
And it,
if you found, you should be able to find most, if not all of the early.
yeah, I have the 2018.
Okay,
but
that's
what I
good.
was gonna say is it's just one chapter ahead for the rest of them, like
Yeah.
early medievals, chapter 15, and so on.
That's
But
what I thought. Yeah.
I just figured that I assumed that that's what you want us to
Yeah.
be doing.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's helpful for
Got it.
the students, fellow students are all my students to know. I will say the same thing. In the other two classes I teach, two other different sections with different topics, periods that we cover. I think I put it in the syllabi for those two. This syllabi, I guess, I apologize, I didn't put it in type at this first page of the syllabus, but you just helped me clarify. I think I said
All
it
right,
at the
thank you.
beginning. Sure. Yeah, no, so you figured it
Yeah,
out.
no worries.
Yeah, good. All right, it's important for that obviously reason that you want to know which chapters to study for the exam. The numbering could vary from one edition to the other, but you can see the slides under the heading of each of those topics. And sometimes they slightly alter the wording of that chapter's title, but you can see what I mean when you go through them, and you'll see almost all of the slides on syllabus came from one of the more recent editions of Stockstead. Okay, any other questions about extra credit or your papers?
What I had dropped out of the Zoom for a bit. When do you think you'll be able to upload the YouTube videos? So
I have been.
just like update.
I've
my
been
notes.
doing it.
I mean,
Yeah,
no, I mean like when you'll be able to do it.
This
for
one?
this, yeah,
This one?
recording.
Well, I almost always do it by 8 p.m. on Friday. Now I was a little behind that this last Friday for reasons that have nothing to do with the class. I think it was 9 p.m. So the safe thing to do is on Saturday of each weekend. It should be as early in the morning as you've got the care to log on and look for, right? You heard me just say this, or did you? When I said I have to have a second channel, I had to add a second channel because I got frozen out of I don't need to waste your time or mine trying to speculate why. It just happened overnight, and then I could access any of my new video or post on there, my new videos starting 2 weeks ago. So the last 2 weeks are already on there, and this week's will be on. 2 lectures, obviously, from today and Wednesday will be on there on YouTube on my second channel. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's the same title except number 2 at the end, and then you just navigate till you can find it. And it's a green circle. I didn't assign myself the color with the letter M in it instead of a brown circle like my old channel was. So it's a second channel with the number 2, Mark Wilson's SRJC Art History Lectures 2. And then you can search till you'll see them. They'll be there before, probably before 8 p.m. on Friday. But if you want to be sure of the fact that they're loaded, I would just say Saturday morning or anytime after that. Okay. Yeah, the same for every week, each week's videos, unless there's some, again, new problem that comes up, technological problem that I haven't control over, but that shouldn't happen again. All right, now this is my office hour. So again, this is your chance to ask any questions relating to, I hope you're all nearing the finish line with your papers, or, doing one more read through, or if you do any questions, you'll forward them, either the questions or a sample of your paper. But don't wait till tomorrow afternoon to do that. You should do it today if you want me to give you feedback before the papers due, which is midnight on Wednesday. All right. Any other questions about anything, extra credit or anything else? Oh, I think I'm going to do the walking tour. I've said that before, but now I just need to find an assistant who can, and it has to be someone who's not a current student of mine, of course, who can, and I would pay, of course, probably one of my readers or past readers to help with the logistics of the tour itself, the actual event. It'll be on a Sunday, one of the probably second or third Sundays in May, assuming it doesn't rain both weekends, although that wouldn't be a bad thing, but I don't want to do a walking tour in the rain. Or heaven forbid, there's another huge surge, which there doesn't appear to be in terms of serious infections or hospitalizations from COVID. And we just had spring break, right? Almost every college finished with their spring breaks. Of course, here at ours, at the JC, what was that, 3 weeks ago? Yeah, so I'll go with that doesn't change. So I will definitely make a decision before the end of April, and I'll send everyone an email. If I have walking tours worth 20 points, and it's an easy way to just enjoy something you wouldn't otherwise be able to see with fellow students, or even invite a guest, even, and get 20 points. All right, last call. Anybody else have any other questions about anything I just mentioned, or your grades or extra good? I think I've gotten back to everyone who didn't get a grade for some weird reason. Okay, thank you, you guys. Take care. We'll see you on Wednesday. Yeah.
Thank
See you
you.
Wednesday.
Right. All right.
Thank you.